Hello and welcome. You see here a Drobo and it's upside down. The reason it's upside down because it's dead. But luckily I had a spare. And a spare is here working fine. But is having a spare a good thing? Well, not really. You see, I haven't really addressed the elephant in the room, the real problem. This Drobo is obsolete and I really need to replace it with a system that acts like a Drobo, works like a Drobo, goes like a Drobo. However, there is nothing out there that is a direct replacement or a Drobo these days. And this video is about my solution to a Drobo replacement, and I think you'll be a little bit surprised. Now, if you've not heard of a Drobo, it has the following attributes that I really like. It is fast, connected to my Mac using a Thunderbolt cable, and that makes it a DAS. It holds up to 5 drives, each up to 16 terabytes in size, and importantly for me, you can insert any size drive at any time as and when you want it to grow. And so this is the main feature I did not want to compromise on my Drobo substitute. It is also very easy to use, there's nothing really to configure, and it just works, which is absolutely fantastic. Well, most of the time, until this one died. I'm now waiting for that one to die. But in the meantime, before all that happens, I'm going to find a Drobo replacement. Now, finding a replacement for a Drobo with all these features, as you probably gathered if you've been Drobo hunting, is not really possible these days. There are systems out there that come close. Some have a good feature but then have another feature missing, and yeah, it can just go around in circles. They're also very expensive and you still have to buy the hard drives to populate it. A set of hard drives, not just one, a set. So I believe I've made a RAID array that is far cheaper with most of the features that I want. And also, this video is about some of those features I did not expect either. It just really bugs me that most RAID solutions out there want you to choose the array size up front, which is both very expensive and a waste. A waste because should you want to increase the size of your array, you need to discard the perfectly good set of discs that were working for another set of discs that are just going to replace it. And then what you're going to do with the old ones. And then you need to find a place to stick your data, which is particularly large, can be a challenge. So you can dismantle this array to put it over on that array to bring it all back again and copy. So effectively you need 2 arrays. So I've been thinking about this for a long time and I really need a solution eventually when this Drobo comes to die. Well, the second one at least. Also want to build my own solution as I believe I could make it better, cheaper. Now the nearest I could find to a solution on paper was either to build a low power Intel PC and put the RAID software onto it, or buy a ready-made PC and do the same. Now, I could build a PC from scratch. It's not something I'm familiar with, so while I am confident I could do it, I don't think I could do it without some faff and probably some money wasting along the way with a few components going, oh, got that wrong. So I went for something better. I brought this MacPro 4,1 for £99 instead off eBay. It's fully working, all the parts are there from day one, and it's ready to roll. Now, this is not my first MacPro, so I'm very familiar with it. Over here is my previous MacPro, well, my current MacPro, and this one is 14 years old. It's totally maxed out as and when I finished using it when I got my MacPro 2019. It runs Mojave, which still allows me to run old 32-bit programs and image file codecs, which are not available on later Macs. Very handy indeed. And believe me when I say handy, this MacPro, even though it's this old, has saved my butt a few times with that ability to open it up, insert drives, format them, fiddle them around with them, and take them out and put them onto another Mac. So that's been very handy over the years. It also acts as my second backup storage solution to my Drobo by effectively being a NAS. As it is a secondary storage to the Drobo, it gets switched off most of the time to conserve electricity. Now the software I'm going to use to put on this MacPro £99 is UnRaid. Using UnRaid helps me with the second of 3 data rules that should be followed to ensure your data storage is robust and safe. These 3 rules are: make 3 copies of your data before you work on it, back up your copies on 2 types of media, which I'll explain in a moment I have achieved, and finally take at least 1 backup and take it off-site, i.e. do not store it at home. Now UnRaid is based on the Linux OS, which means it uses a different file system to the Mac. hence 2 media types, which means for whatever reason, should one of those systems break down, I have an alternative file system on which to rescue my files from. Unlike those people who had several backups on the same file system on the same hardware using those SanDisk Extreme Pro gizmos. And if you don't know what that scandal was all about, have a look up on Google for SanDisk Extreme Pro failures. It also means should either one of the hardware fail, Mac or my second Mac, the drives from that UnRaid Mac can be removed and stuck in a Linux machine and the data fairly easily extracted from it. This is very much unlike the Drobo, which one of its very serious down points was its proprietary file system. If that Drobo went down, which it has, not the hard drives, but the hardware's gone down, it effectively renders the whole system useless unless you have another Drobo to take those drives out and stick them into. Hence the reason I bought that second Drobo to rescue me from that situation. But I'm now back to that situation again since the first one's dead. So unless I can find another one or find an alternative, yeah. Now, back to the MacPro 4,1 that I got off eBay for £99. I chose this one because of its low starting bid and because it looked like it had been relatively untouched, unmodified in any way, which was important to ensure its reliability going forward. Its case is in fine condition for its age. It has hardly any scratches, dents or dinks, so I just had to give it a good clean and I'm off to the races. Having a good clean case was one of the criteria for getting a Mac because I need it to look good while it sits there. This one came with a 4-core 8-thread Intel W5320 processor with 2.6 GHz boosting to 2.93. This is by no means a strong CPU by today's standards, but it's perfectly adequate to run UnRaid. This Mac Pro also came with 16 gigs of RAM, which is an absolute bonus. Again, perfectly adequate for UnRaid. It also came with an NVIDIA GT120 graphics card, which is absolutely pants compared to current GPU cards you can get today. But again, perfectly adequate for UnRaid. In fact, UnRaid doesn't even need a graphics card, it can run totally headless. However, as I will come to later, I chose to keep it installed with the keyboard and mouse that came with the Mac, because I had a few issues. Now, as you can see here, or I'll try and show you in a separate photo, that graphics card takes up one of 4 PCIe slots. These slots are suitable to hold cards, to hold SATA drives or NVMe drives, so you can use them to build UnRaid data pools if you wish, or add them to your data array. In fact, I have here a Sonny card and I put that in there and gave it a test and it works perfectly nicely. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the MacPro 2009, and the reason I chose it is because it comes with the ability to hold 6 hard drives. It's got 4 slates here. I won't pull it out right now because it is on, and then the CD place up here you can hold another 2. So that's 6 hard drives in total, all running SATA 2 drives, which is perfectly adequate for the speed that we will be running these drives at and pulling data off. This is where I put the UnRaid parity drive up here, because it's very unlikely that I'll be removing that drive, and I've left these 4 drives to be the ones that I can take in and out more often, hopefully not. Now, the Mac Pro also comes with 5 USB 2.0 ports as well as 4 FireWire 800 ports. These can be used for further attachment of further storage, but beware, adding disks via USB is not recommended by UnRaid. Those USB 2.0 ports may be slow, but they are good for UnRaid 2 as it recommends USB 2.0 over USB 3.0 for that USB boot stick. Anyway, 5 built-in USB ports will allow the system to automatically boot UnRaid in theory. I will come to that in a moment. So I think my Mac Pro off eBay from 2009 is a good partner for UnRaid. It is also a good looking box in my opinion. On this USB stick, Samsung Pro metal USB stick, it was recommended by a guy who went through a whole proliferary of USB sticks on Windows to test the whole proliferary of USB sticks, and this one came out the best, so I'll be using these again in the future. But I've got 2 of these. This is the spare and it's empty, and the one on the Mac is the boot drive in one of the USB ports at the back. Oh, and I don't know if you've noticed, but probably not because it's a little bit dark, but I also have here a little notebook which is stuffed inside because there's still plenty of room, and in here I've got down written instructions on how to recover the boot drive, serial numbers, passwords, and bits and pieces about Linux that are even a bit obscure to me, so I've written down in here just in case I need to get out of sticky situations. So this book lives in the Mac Pro. Now you can buy UnRaid in one of 3 license level, and I have chosen the UnRaid Pro license level, which allows me to have up to 8 connected storage devices at the time the system boots connected to the UnRaid array. This was enough for me to explore how best to configure UnRaid while giving me the options to expand it a little bit depending on the final set of drives I wish to start off with. Those I haven't decided yet. You can upgrade from a lower license to the next license up for a small fee. So what I did for my first setup was I put 6 existing very small capacity drives in it. 3 actually came with the Mac, bonus, and 3 came with the spare Drobo, another bonus, totaling about 8 terabytes. So not very high capacity, but enough for me to explore UnRaid and put it through all its different configurations and try to make it fail. And also in that process learn how to use UnRaid so I don't fail. I do recommend that you do this before you need to use your UnRaid system in anger. It will allow you to iron out any issues that you may come across and also fix the learning curve so that you don't have to do this all at the last time and make a drastic mistake. Hence my little notebook. So what I did first, as I alluded to earlier, is I set up UnRaid in a sort of mock setup and connected it to my network via 1 gigabit Ethernet connection, allowing it to connect to my Mac Pro 2019. Now what I do like about UnRaid is you can interface into it via its web page using a phone or an iPad. Very, very handy, one up over the Drobo. Now, in my exploration of how to best use UnRaid in this Mac Pro, I also had handy a Sony Mac5 card. Now if you've not seen one of these cards before, it's absolutely fantastic. They're a tad expensive, but you'll see why it's really got an ace up its sleeve. It comes with 10 gigabit Ethernet, 2 USB Gen 2 10 gigabit ports, and it can hold up to 2 NVMe sticks totaling 16 gigabytes, all on the one PCI card, allowing you to free up all those other spaces. Unfortunately I bought that from MacPro 2009, but even with DOS Patcher I need Monterey installed and only have Mojave, so unfortunately the drivers won't load and it won't work. At least the 10 gigabit Ethernet part won't work, and that's what I bought it for. And it will work in an UnRaid setup. So what is my chosen UnRaid configuration and how will I integrate it into my data storage solution? Before I answer that question, let me give you some context to my current situation and what I propose my strategy will be. This is my current setup today. I have a Drobo, a Mac Pro 2019 and a Mac Pro 2009. The Drobo is just an extension of the Mac Pro via that Thunderbolt cable, and I interface it primarily just using macOS Finder, which is absolutely fantastic. It is extremely quick and responsive to my needs. Now the Mac Pro 2009 acts as a secondary storage to the Drobo. It contains individual large capacity drives, not rated in any way, shared across the network, and they duplicate what's ever on the Drobo. So effectively it's a NAS. Importantly, those drives on the Mac Pro mirror the Drobo content exactly, and that is maintained by the Unix command or MacPro command or Linux command Rsync. If you want to know more about the powerful Rsync command, then I have a video that you can have a look at which I made a few years back based on my Mac Pro 2009 NAS. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. It explains quite thoroughly Rsync in the second part of the video. Now I started out with all intention that the UnRaid Mac Pro becomes the Drobo replacement, the primary storage. But as I give my reasons later in this video, and I'll follow up perhaps in some more detailed videos later as there's too much detail to fit in this one video, I've had to relegate that Mac Pro UnRaid system from first tier straight to third tier / cold storage device. This is very unfortunate, but not too bad as I haven't really spent a lot of money, but I'm glad I found this out now and hopefully it won't be such a disappointment for you too. It is still very workable, but you have to plan it differently, work with it differently to get around UnRaid and the Mac OS when the two are combined. Now I'll show you the UnRaid configuration I plan to have from the start, using my £99 Mac Pro as the model, A popular UnRaid configuration is as shown. There are two parts to a popular configuration. There's the RAID array consisting of a set of 2 or more spinning hard drives, and ultimately that holds all the data I wish to store. Terabytes of Final Cut Pro projects plus other things like family photos or accounts. The other part of an UnRaid system is the cache data pool. That allows for quicker read and write speeds using either SSDs or NVMe storage. That is separate and is treated as a scratch space. It's much smaller, this space, than the array. When things are quiet, data is then moved from that data pool and transferred to the data array. So it's solely treated as a temporary space. You can RAID it if you want to, but it's meant to be a smaller temporary space. There is a UnRaid service called Mover, and you can schedule that to take stuff from the data cache pool and move that over to the array at convenient times. And because of how UnRaid works, it is not exactly renowned for its speed. So I expect you're saying right now, why are you choosing UnRaid given its known characteristics as a Drobo replacement? Well, we go back to the primary reason, and that is the ability to grow and add drives when you want, as and when your license allows. The only stipulation is the UnRaid parity drive has to be bigger or as big as the largest drive in that array, which is fine. And you can, as I've experimented, you can remove that parity drive and replace it with a bigger one. So you can still grow the parity drive by removing any drive and or replacing a parity drive. So nothing is wasted. Now, this is my chosen UnRaid configuration. In my test setup, I chose not to have a data cache pool because of how I want this to work in my final setup. From my testing, I found 3 bottlenecks that come together to compound a bigger problem and make for, unfortunately, a very slow data transfer speeds to and from the UnRaid to the Mac. The first is the 1 gigabit Ethernet speed, not the main problem. Second is the way UnRaid works when saving data to the data array. It only goes as fast as the speed of the drive it's going at because it needs to write to the parity drive as well. It does not write to multiple drives at once, unlike other RAID systems, hence the reason it's renowned to be slow, and I can confirm that. The third problem is the binding problem that brings those other 2 problems together, is the way macOS implements Samba and how it's not the fastest when it tries to talk to other OS systems like UnRaid. It is very, very slow, a lot of kilobytes slower, even over 1 gigabyte Ethernet. It's not clear to me, but I know it's not necessarily UnRaid's fault. When you bring these 3 problems together, they just make the whole situation worse. Usable, but very, very slow. The forums did give some clues as to what I needed to do. I downloaded some apps to tune the UnRaid system, but overall the system read-write speeds to and from the data array to a Mac using Samba is really not a workable solution. So given all this that I've found, when I finally replaced Drobo, the hardware that could have been used for the data pool inside the UnRaid MacPro will now be used directly with my MacPro 2019 instead. I've effectively moved the data cache pool from the UnRaid system and put it in direct control of the MacPro 2019. There I get the benefit of the highest speeds possible, that combined with the Rsync command that will be used as my mover to take stuff from my data pool and move it to the MacPro UnRaid system, much like I do now with Drobo to my MacPro 2009. And I'll probably only do that once or twice a week, or depending on my YouTube creativity and Final Cut Pro projects I produce. So my impeding and current situation is set up here, which will likely turn into this setup in the future. The primary storage will be in or connected to the MacPro 2019. The MacPro 2009 will remain my secondary storage NAS, nothing will change there, apart from maybe some bigger hard drives later. And the £99 UnRaid MacPro will become the 3rd tier / cold storage system. Now you may be thinking that primary storage you've just seen from my final solution is either going to be very, very expensive and or not the same capacity as the secondary and 3rd tier storage. I've always had that same size across the lot, and you would be correct. For one, the storage device required would be likely not fit inside this MacPro tower, even though it's pretty big and you can expand it. It will likely entail a multi-drive external unit. And this is when it dawned on me. I should have asked myself earlier, in all this procrastination over many months of Drobo replacements, and it is while I was sitting here writing this script for this video, I remember I have an unused external Thunderbolt eGPU box. Now maybe I could use that as my data cache pool. It could be very expensive, but it would be very fast. But really that's not the problem. I diverge. I'll leave that for another day. But you know what the real problem was? During this whole investigation and deliberation into a replacement Drobo, investigating UnRaid and establishing the storage strategy I was going to use, it had me thinking. And I can't believe I did not think of it before. There is one fundamental thing that is at the root of this whole problem, and I nearly missed it, getting lost in Drobo hunting. And that is the one question I should have asked myself: what is my data and how often do I need to access it? You see, for me, I create very large Final Cut Pro projects only as frequently as I make YouTube videos. I do not keep the raw film data, I throw that away. Also have much smaller video projects that, like music and YouTube tiles, that go with that project. I make a directory, store all the files for that project in one file directory, and that could be between 30 to 300 gigabytes in size.
You what?
But that is not the fundamental thing here. Is I do not access those projects again for a very, very long time. And if I do need to access a project, it's for material to put in a newer project, I probably only look at projects that are no more than 2 years old, which means the rest of the projects that I have, I never see, I never look at, don't even go near them. I just like the idea of keeping them around. And that is effectively a waste of space on my Drobo, because I'm keeping that all on my Drobo data that I rarely access in expensive space. So my conclusion out of all this is, why do you need all that space when you don't access the data?
This smack on head.
You could have a faster but smaller primary storage device. So what I did to confirm this, I sat down and looked through all my Final Cut Pro projects to see how they were stored on my Drobo. It turns out, as of right now, I can get away with a primary storage device of about 1/5 the size of the Drobo I use today. With improved file date naming system, that would let me find and establish contents of projects quicker, and no need to pull them off to second or third tier unless I really identified the projects I need. When I think I have found the project, I can then move it across to primary so that Final Cut Pro can have access to it. And that's the important point here for Final Cut Pro owners. If you have a really old project, do make a copy of it before you touch it, because Final Cut Pro, in its wisdom, will update it project to its latest version. And in that process, and this has happened to me, it can corrupt your video project, hence rendering it useless. So make a copy before you touch it with Final Cut Pro. Now, as I mentioned before, my configuration will just be an array of spinning disks. There will be no data pool cache. To have the ability to manage a drive of array of different sizes, you need to configure UnRaid with the BTRFS file system, and I will have one parity drive. All drives will be connected to the MacPro SATA ports, not USB. Like I said, that's not recommended by UnRaid. In the settings, I have unconstructed write turbo mode. Made a little bit of difference, not a lot. And I've turned on UnRaid's Mac interoperability boost. Didn't work. And then I will leave all the management of data to the Rsync command to do all the heavy lifting from now on. And there are reasons for that. One was because of that Samba issue, not talking to UnRaid in a cooperative way, doing a lot of handshaking and doing absolutely no moving of data. And of course I've made a backup of this UnRaid boot stick so I won't lose my license key, and importantly I won't lose access to my third tier storage. Now I have here the apps I've installed to help manage and tune UnRaid. You may like to have a look at them. As you've probably gathered by now, I have not mentioned anything to do with running VMs on my UnRaid MacPro. That is because I do not plan to at this stage. I just want to keep it simple while trying to make UnRaid MacPro as efficient as possible. Now some of you may be saying, wait a minute Ilya, This Mac Pro is probably not the best thing to use as a NAS due to its power consumption compared to other systems you can either buy or build yourself. And yes, I mostly agree with that. But I think there's a lot of other benefits this Mac Pro gives me that compensate for the high wattage compared to other systems. However, I do not think it's that bad. Remember, I have relegated my UnRaid Mac Pro to be a third tier / cold storage device, and so it will be switched off for long periods of time between them making the mountain bike videos. So I don't think that's really an issue here. Out of curiosity, I did look at UnRaid Mac Pro's power consumption, and here is the power consumption of the Mac Pro UnRaid system at various points in its uptime. When I took these readings, the Mac Pro had inside it the GT120 graphics card, one PCIe USB 3.0 card, and 5 3.5-inch drives. This particular slide here shows the power consumption of the background usage with everything switched off that I can in my room and on my desk. The next picture, this is the UnRaid Mac Pro just after boot up, checking drives, and one person, me, using its web interface. The next picture is with the 5 drives idling with no user interaction or transferring of files. And the final picture is with the drives all spun down with the system up but idling. So as you gathered, that minus the 22 means the system on average uses about 108 watts just sitting there. Now we come to the elephant in the room. The unfortunate quirks, unexpected things and issues that I've found with this particular UnRaid setup as I've discovered during my testing. You remember back earlier in the video I mentioned that I decided to keep the GT120 video card installed along with the keyboard and mouse? I'd really like not to do that, but hey ho, there you go. Well, it turns out about 50% of the time the UnRaid Mac Pro will not start up and boot automatically off the USB stick. The Mac Pro will just sit there doing nothing. So the only way you can remedy this is with a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse, and that means you need to hold down the key on the keyboard, the Alt key, go into the Mac's boot menu, choose the USB stick, UnRaid USB stick, and then boot from that. And when you do it that way, it generally succeeds most of the time. Not sure why it's doing this. It should detect the USB stick on every boot, but somehow it misses it. I haven't a problem in macOS itself. It is a little bit concerning, I must admit, because if that doesn't boot, I've got no data. The next issue, when the Mac Pro is under Mac OS like any other PC, it can go into level 3 sleep mode and then be woken up wake on LAN. If I do this with the UnRaid system, it goes to sleep forever. In fact, it goes into a coma, and I cannot wake it up for the life of me.
He's dead, Jim.
Again, I do not have an answer to this, but that's a minor problem, so I won't put the Mac Pro to sleep. Again, I don't know why. Another reason why I have the keyboard and monitor and mouse attached is a quirk in my Linksys mesh network in my house. And this can happen to the UnRaid Mac Pro, which means I need to go in as root administrator, force the dropping and renewing of the IP address. Again, nuisance. Now, the UnRaid system itself is relatively simple to use once you get familiar with it and set it up with the optimum settings for your needs. There is a learning curve in my opinion, and I reckon that will take you 1 to 2 weeks of study. So you will need to invest some time to make sure that going through the online documentation and scanning those forums for the answers that you have questions for do pay off. The UnRaid forums are on the most part helpful while patient. There are people there with a lot of experience on using UnRaid over the many years, and those people can give you some very good answers. But it must be noted, there are also questions I asked I did not get answers to. An example of that is the FTP server that UnRaid comes with. For some unknown reason, when I set that up, it treats the Mac Pro as a read-only device, which is really not very useful. So that with Samba and UnRaid's FTP being practically useless, I've had to again resort to Rsync. But the main disappointment of this whole Mac Pro UnRaid setup though, when it all boiled down, is that Ethernet communication speed and the read-write between hard drives in UnRaid array, coupled with reading and writing to a Mac over the network. Now, I knew from my initial research before buying the Mac Pro and the UnRaid license that UnRaid is not renowned for its speed. This is because of how UnRaid works, and it was a price I was willing to pay to have that ability to grow a disk array over time. But in reality, what I found was worse. At best, I have achieved write speeds of about half the speed of the single disk being written to, which for me is about 60 megabytes a second. I get read speeds of about 90 megabytes a second, but if I use that coupled with macOS and Samba, this speed fluctuates wildly and not in a good way. It can often dip down into kilobytes a second, which makes traversing the file system totally unworkable. The theoretical maximum of the file transfer is that 1 gigabit, and I can nearly touch that with using Rsync. So anything else seems to have a massive overhead. Back to the FTP server, this turned out, as I said, to be another disappointment. For some reason which I have not had an answer to from the UnRaid forums, is when it communicates with the MacPro 2019 or any other Mac, it's treated as a read-only device. It was suggested I replace it with Pro FTPD, but that's no longer available on UnRaid store, and nobody has suggested an alternative, and those that I have found I haven't managed to install. So in my exploration of finding alternatives or ways to fix this speed issue, I thought, what happens if I use my Samsung T5 drive, use that via a PCI USB card in the Mac Pro, and see what speeds I get there. See if there's any overheads or not, and that will give me more indication of what the true speed could be if everything was up to scratch. So I did that, filled the T5 drive with a 100 gigabyte Final Cut Pro project, connected that to the UnRaid Mac Pro, then using UnRaid's MC command, short for Move Commander, I copied directly the 1 gigabyte Final Cut Pro project to the RAID array. This achieved respectable speeds of up to 110 megabytes a second, which was what I was hoping to get over the Ethernet connection. Why this is faster copying the same project to the same data array using Rsync, I don't know. But there is some overhead in there, and it does get in the way of the overall speed of read-writes to and from the UnRaid system. So between that and Samba and FTP, Rsync is the winner. Rsync with the Samsung T5 drive is even better, but that seems to be archaic in a way, because that seems like back to the old days. If floppy net, i.e. you put a floppy disk in this thing, copy it off, take it to your next PC and copy it and put it over there. But if I've got truly large files, that is probably my best solution, and that makes the UnRaid Mac Pro truly a cold storage device, because I maybe don't even need to get connected to the network. So there you go. I have an unrated Mac Pro, which on the most part does work as promised, but with some issues that you've just heard about. The main one being the file transfer speed and the unusability of Samba and FTP. If Samba was fast and reliable, it would transform this whole experience completely into something that would be absolutely brilliant if you just open up a folder, scroll down a directory, copy that project, go. But unfortunately it's not that. So you have to resort to SSH, which is fiddly, and if you're not familiar with it, can be a little bit daunting, but there are good instructions out there on how to set up SSH so you can do a seamless interaction with UnRaid by logging in. That is provided by Linux and Mac OS systems, so you can do it, and I have done it, and that's what I'm using now. On a positive note, this Mac Pro is not going into a landfill. I've used the resources I didn't have to pay for, because I mean it's already, someone's paid for that already, and it's good for my pocket and sort of most of my time. Now I know it does not come with any guarantees. I mean, this Mac Pro is 14 years old, and it, like the Drobo, could die tomorrow. However, unlike the Drobo, I can go out and buy another Mac Pro and just replace it and get myself back up and running really fast, really cheaply. So I wanted to share this experience with you because this was not announced on the tin, if you see what I mean. I knew about UnRaid being slow and there's some issues with it, but when I investigated, there is more underneath the carpet. On the surface, UnRaid is pretty polished, it's got a nice interface, but as soon as you step off that road, you dive into Linux, and Linux, from my experience, is ready to be a rabbit hole for you to dive into and get totally lost. But going forward, I am going to continue using my UnRaid Mac Pro because I've put some investment into it. Now I haven't put a lot of investment into it, so I could walk away from it. But it is a workable third tier solution not a first tier solution. MacPro is a robust unit and it has a lot going for it. It allows me to get the hardware side of things up and running very, very quickly and cheaply, and I can really expand it in many ways. So it gives me a lot of options. The UnRaid Pro license was £89, and the USB stick from Amazon was about 15 times 2. And remember, that Mac Pro, there's many out there like that. You could perhaps get a similar system, 16 gig, 8 thread CPU, with all its trays and keyboard for £99. You just need to add hard drives or PCIe cards and you're off, and you could probably hold hundreds of terabytes. I hope you found this video useful. I do plan to make follow-up videos on my experience with more detail on how to do little things that could be important. These videos do take a fair bit of time to write and put together, so to show your appreciation, I know you got this far, so I thank you for that, but please tell YouTube that you like this video, as this will help the channel out a lot. And of course, if you want to see more videos on my UnRaid journey, and I'm sure there will be some more journeys, then do hit that subscription button and turn on notifications too. And of course, I've got my mountain bike videos and bits and pieces too, so if you're interested in that, do have a look at them. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.